lovely Bloom people. Gotten the chance to know about 20 of you in some depth in the last 24 plus hours and rave reviews so far. You're doing very important work, and we're happy to have you here for the inaugural Bloom. I am joined here today for a conversation on the rise of nature markets, and importantly, getting it right, important part of that sentence, with Helen Crowley and Hiba Larsson. I will let you share a little bit about the who and where, that is who you are, where you work, and what you're doing. So tell us where your firms fit in this nature investment ecosystem and what you spend your time doing.
Yeah.
Hiba, you first.
So my name is Hiba Larsson, great to be here. So I head up our nature investment platform at NatureFinance. And NatureFinance is a non-for-profit organization based in Switzerland. And our sole mission is to make nature count in global finance in an equitable way. And we really work across the whole ecosystem. So we work with the central banking community in nature and climate scenarios. We work with financial regulators in terms of linking nature crimes with money laundering. And we also host a sustainability-linked sovereign debt hub. And within my area of work, we make early stage investment in the innovation needed in this space.
Awesome. Thank you, Hiba and Helen.
Yeah, well, lovely to be here. Thank you, and well done, GreenBiz team, for Bloom. This is great. So I'm a managing director, Dr. Helen Crowley. I'm a managing director with Pollination, and Pollination is a climate and nature advisory and investment company. So we sit right in that sweet spot of trying to help our clients, whether they be governments or corporates, landholders, NGOs, really think about what's it going to take to transition to net zero and nature positive. How do you build the strategy, the solutions, but also the financing mechanisms to support that? But we also have an investment arm, and we invest in projects, some of the largest mangrove restoration projects in the world in the Indus Delta in Pakistan. We've invested in that. We've invested in a green hydrogen project with Indigenous people in Australia. We have a joint venture, a fund with HSBC called Climate Asset Management, which is one of the largest natural capital investment funds. So we have both sides. I'm more on the advisory side, helping our clients navigate that net zero to nature positive transition. And we're also a knowledge partner with NatureFinance. So Hiba and I work together on some initiatives together as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
One could make a reasonable assumption as to what we mean when we pair the word nature and market together. But Hiba, can you lay out in as layish person terms as possible what we mean when we say nature markets? Where is money moving, between whom, why, and to whose and what's benefit?
Yes, so I think in its simplest form, nature markets refer to where nature is valued and traded, explicitly valued and traded. And here, the sort of largest component is soft commodities, which trade at $1 trillion annually. And then you have the more nascent and emerging markets, such as biodiversity credit markets and carbon markets.
Got it. And Helen, your firm, some recent research that you put out on this topic of nature found that, quote, the foundation of economic value generation, which was until recently largely invisible to investors. That is the definition of nature in this context. So what are investors seeing that they hadn't seen before? And I guess importantly, what is enabling them to see that they hadn't been able to see before?
Great question. I think it's not just investors, let's be clear. I mean, I've been in this game for 30 odd years, and the last 3 to 5 years are pretty remarkable in the fact that nature has become visible to a lot of people, and a lot of reason why you're here. And for some of us have been working on that for a long time to try and make nature visible. So what is it? Particularly with the investment community, there was $24 trillion worth of investor community at the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal. Unheard of before, over 1,000 financial institutions and corporates at that convention. It's usually one that you didn't see, a lot of private sector. So what was the difference? The difference has been perhaps, I would say there are 3 quick points that have come together, sort of an alignment of the stars, if you like. One is, I think there's a recognition of the rate of loss and degradation of nature. I mean, from 2019 on with the IPBES report, the panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services, that said we've lost so much. Secondly, and aligned with that recognition of loss has been the recognition that 100% of our economy is embedded in nature, and then the sort of the WEF statistics that you hear about the World Economic Forum report on at least half, if not more than half, of our economy is moderately or highly dependent on nature. So whoa, it's a recognition that we're dependent on this thing that we're losing and degrading. So with that comes risk. And the other thing that I think that has come, that understanding of risk, and we can talk a little bit about opportunity, is the idea that that nature and climate are so interlinked. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer now, but several years ago, the idea of nature-based solutions for climate was really sort of, we were out on the sort of over there on the side table. We weren't at the main table, you know, the nature-based solutions for climate. But now the recognition you've got to solve for both or solve for neither is there. So I think those all have come together in literally the last 3 years, along with now the frameworks to say, this is what you've got to do. TNFD is perhaps the one that we know the most about in terms of saying this is what risk is going to look like for you, this is where opportunity starts for you as an investor, as a corporate, as a private sector entity. So that's why I think we're in a very different space.
Yeah. And maybe this is the same piece of research, but it was the survey you did of about 1,000 international institutional investors on their readiness for engaging in the nature investment space, a more risk-averse category of investor than one might find at our co-located event here, Verge 23, focused on climate tech. And 71% of the respondents thought that nature will evolve into its own distinct asset class.
Yeah.
So question for you, and also curious if you have thoughts, why does that matter?
Yeah, I'm going to say a couple of things, but Hiba's the expert on investment. I'm an ecologist, sort of winging my way through this world. So I thought that was fascinating. So the institutional investors, the group that we surveyed, were already quite interested in nature, and the majority of them said they wanted to up their investments in nature. So that was already really interesting. But as you said, Grant, over half of them said that nature should be its own asset class, so which is really exciting, because once you create an asset class, it becomes explicit, and the rules of the game about, you know, finance flowing into that and what the rules that come with that in terms of risk and returns start being clearer, instead of it sort of being embedded and a little implicit in other types of asset classes. So I think this idea that nature is going to be a standalone asset class, and we can unpack that a bit later, is really exciting.
No, I would agree with that, because I think what we've seen sort of in the climate space is a very aligned vision of how to allocate capital. So we saw the whole electrification wave, and I think that is what we're lacking in when it comes to nature. I think the risk, though, is that we become too focused on a smaller segment, so land-based solutions and nature-based solutions, whereas in my world, I would rather see that we include nature in every aspect of the value chain. And we know, for instance, that corporates need to disclose their sort of value chains, and consumers need to be more aware as well what's going on. So nature is there every step of the way, but I think the easiest way to define it for investors at this point is in nature itself as a primary asset, but I think we quickly need to build those building blocks to incorporate it across the whole portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a somewhat similar vein, your firm hosts an initiative, the Task Force on Nature Markets. You put out a series of recommendations to a pretty broad swath of folks, corporates, policymakers, civil society alike, on making nature markets work. And one statement that stood out to me was that if left simply to evolve in their own way, they, being nature markets, could make things worse. So what does evolving in their own way look like exactly, and what are the potential consequences that we would hope to avoid in that process?
Yeah, I think which many in the audience might be able to relate to is the whole development of the voluntary carbon market, which at the onset had all the right intentions and provided a very important revenue stream to some of these local communities. But since we've seen the evolution of a quite opaque market, And I think the danger is that capital doesn't get directed to where it's needed. And more importantly, I think the equitable element has got completely forgotten. And I think that is the risks that we want to avoid. And just recognizing that nature is a finite asset. So we don't have time to waste on this inertia of doing things the way we've always done them. We need to do them differently. And we need to bring the local communities and indigenous people into the conversation this time around.
Can I just add?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think that the challenge has been the way a lot of nature markets have worked today has been an extractive approach, right? I mean, that's where, whether it's through agriculture and forestry or fisheries, or you extract the value from nature, you don't actually replenish it. Our challenge now is to develop new rules of the game and new ways of taking supply chains, for example, instead of extracting the value from nature, is to replenish, restore, avoid the loss, restore, regenerate, conserve, replenish natural capital. The only way you replenish natural capital is investing in living nature and reinvesting, and the stewards of that are local communities and indigenous people. So how do we take these markets and reconstruct the rules of the game so that financing flows in a different way?
Yeah. I want to channel a different moderator for this question. That is, a decade plus ago, Grant, UC Berkeley humanities major, a lot more opinions, a lot less informed, and a lot more hair. And he's just learning about capitalism in a thoughtful way, and as a good Berkeley humanities student, is a little suspect of it. For those who are either tuning in or some in the audience who share the sentiment of like the concern about a lot of the negative impacts that we're talking about here are coming from a history of undervaluing and overexploiting nature, but that the idea of putting a price on living things and privatizing things to this extent maybe is going to add to the problem and have a hard time finding confidence in that being a solution. What's your response to that crowd?
Hiba.
Yeah, okay. I think I might challenge that question because it's already happening. And I think that's part of the problem. So we're not putting a value, and I don't necessarily mean a financial value, but nature isn't counted for at all. And so we're already facing these challenges. So I think I can see the criticism of certain new sort of emerging markets like biodiversity credits, et cetera. And to your point, we really need to change the financial architecture to ensure it's being done the right way, but it's already privatized, if you like, and the sheer opaqueness of markets is one of the problems, and commodities are a really big part of the issues.
Yeah, I'd say, shall I?
Yeah, please.
You know, that way?
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's a really important point. I remember 10 years ago when I worked at Caring, the global luxury group, and we did a corporate natural capital account, there was a lot of angst around natural capital accounting in those days, saying, well, you're putting a price on nature. Whereas in fact it wasn't that at all. It's valuing something and putting a price on it are two different things. And I think what we've got to do is value it, understand the value, the intrinsic, the extrinsic, the market value, as well as all the other values that come with nature. And then where appropriate, how does some sort of pricing of some element of that, whether it's carbon sequestration or whether it's water retention or whether it's erosion control or resilience, that you can value in a market context so that we can get you can price it and price it so you can get the investment in. So I think valuing it, understand the value, and then using the current architecture, even though no, we've got to change it, to flow the financing in is okay, because with that will come confidence to act differently and change the rules and understand, oh, there's a value proposition here that's greater than just putting a price on a certain element of nature.
I think undergraduate Grant would have a hard time making counterpoints to either of those. Going back to, Helen, the comment you were saying that you've been doing this for a while, and 10 years ago, even more than 2 or 3 years ago, you were your camp was at the smaller table, not at the big table here in these conversations. And a theme that's a through line through Bloom and through Verge as well, that is now table stakes, which is like, and you were quoting Johan Rockström, the father or grandfather or whatever he is to planetary boundaries, that either you solve climate and biodiversity or you don't solve either. And that's kind of a fundamentally understood thing now in this space. And going back to your recommendations, in those recommendations, you were kind of making clear that the playbook to solving climate and the playbook to solving nature have some overlap, but they have really distinct differences that are paramount to focus on. What are those important differences, and what are the first couple chapters of that playbook that we should highlight here?
Yeah. I think that one of the key differences is when we talk about climate, we have a very clearly defined, or at least we think we do, a defined set of metrics that we measure and that we want to achieve. When it comes to nature, we don't have those metrics. So in terms of setting a baseline and really setting objectives, I think we need to become much more clearer in the international stage what we mean by the state of nature, so we need to be able to measure it in the same way. Secondly is this point of the indigenous people and local communities. They are the main stewards of the majority of the world's biodiversity, so they really need to have a seat at the table. And then thirdly, I think it's this sort of focused investment opportunity that we've seen in climate. We lack that today, so we need to find ways and tools and different financial structures to allow capital to flow into nature in the right way.
Yeah.
I would say the first chapter of that book would be run towards complexity. It's okay. You know, like that's what nature is, well, biodiversity, you know, species, genes, ecosystem services are complex. The complexity gives them the power of resilience, power of adaptation, power of evolution. It is a phenomenal power that we only just sort of beginning to understand. So while you might not need to understand all that complexity, you need to just embrace that. I mean, I don't know how my iPhone works, but I can use it. Like, there's a lot of complexity behind that. So we need interfaces, to what he was saying, to sort of simplify that complexity, not simplify the complexity, but communicate the complexity in a simple way. And I think we're getting there between all the fantastic nature tech, and I know Lucy's going to talk later about what's happening in nature tech, what's happening in measuring biodiversity, 50 years, 100 years of ecological studies coming together with tech to really be able to sort of show changes over time in biodiversity in different elements of nature. So I think that we've got to sort of start embracing that and saying, we will be able to track this. We can show land use change over time. We can track how many species there are in a soil, and we can see what happens over time. We can do that, so we can start, you know, we know what we need to do. Yeah. We can start tracking and measuring that and learning as we're going.
A lot of what we're talking about here and a lot of why conferences like Bloom are so important are that they produce newness and forward-looking change. New relationships lead to new ideas, lead to new partnerships, and we change business as usual. And I'll preface this by saying wins are great, win-wins are better, win-win-wins are ideal, win to infinity is the best, but there's also, in a kind of context that we're working in around a mass extinction and the level of severity of this crisis, there's also things we have to stop doing that are not just building more of something. So in the vein of things we kind of need to stop, first thing that comes to mind, in my mind and maybe yours too, is around subsidies, but are there other things that come top of mind for both of you in terms of the things we need to stop doing to get it right when it comes to nature markets?
I mean, I could say on the global biodiversity framework, so that came out of the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, the Kunming-Montreal, Convention on Biological Diversity, the global biodiversity framework, is very clear that we've got to halt the drivers of loss. And in that, it talks about subsidies and the $500 billion a year that need to be repurposed so that your local communities and people that are stewards of nature are still rewarded and incentivized, but to do things differently. So stopping the bad is a really important part of moving forward towards a more nature-positive world. And that is a big reconfiguration. So it's all very exciting to go to the new opportunity of, oh, I'm going to invest in this restoration, and I'm going to invest in this conservation, I'm going to invest in this new fabulous thing that I can measure nature. That's fantastic. That's great opportunity and a lot of investment, and a lot of people are very excited about that, and that's terrific. That doesn't mean that you don't turn around and go, well, hang on a minute, what am I currently doing that is creating risk and is creating negative outcomes? And so that's where we've got to start looking, particularly at agriculture, particularly at the way we extract currently from nature, and think, well, how do we do that differently and stop doing the bad?
Yeah.
And I would just add to that in a very simplified form, I think it's dangerous that we keep separating nature from the economy. I think the two are integral, and we need to consider nature within the context of every single decision and not see it as this sort of separate thing here that we need to measure, and we need to understand how it flows through the economy.
I'm looking at the clock telling us that we have a little over 2 minutes, and in that time, I would love to hear what you would say hypothetically, or not hypothetically, when you're back with us at Bloom 24. What would you want to point back to say, this is how we, as this community here, and those tuning in from the live stream, what they did to change business as usual? What would be the key successes you would hope to highlight?
Oh, well, I think the first thing would be to acknowledge business as usual is probably not possible. It's not possible, but let's acknowledge that we might have a bit more time doing business as usual. But if you acknowledge that business as usual in terms of, I'm not saying you in the room, your business maybe is really heading towards nature positive, and that's tremendous, but generally business as usual is not going to be possible. So acknowledging that, acknowledging and understanding the interface of your business with nature, and then the third thing is starting to commit, even if it's just a beginning of actions toward stopping the drivers, stopping the bad, and doing some good towards nature is already, if just even acknowledging that and building a plan around that, you can do that in a year. You can't go nature positive in a year, but you can do that.
Yeah.
And I think what excites me the most is actually the innovation and technologies. I think a lot of you here have heard some incredible initiatives, and I think the whole biodiversity space is so fascinating. So I think we followed a number of companies, and I hope that in a year's time, a lot of those will sort of set the new standards in markets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I look forward in the time in between reading the first couple chapters of that nature playbook, watching it play out. Thank you, Helen and Hiba, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Please join me in thanking Helen and Hiba.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll follow you guys.